Congress is returning from their break for the holidays, and I want to know, do we get anywhere with impeachment, or are they just going to sit on it because it was so important? They had to move so quickly.
Well, the cognitive dissonance that Nancy Pelosi has created has made her a goddess once again among the media. They think she's just brilliant for screwing up the United States of America by prolonging the impeachment process. I'm certain that she will eventually deliver the articles, probably relatively soon. But if she doesn't, which is conceivable, but I doubt it, there will be motions to dismiss, and there will be attempts to change the Senate rules to allow all sorts of things. So there's no doubt that the Democrats are allowing this to happen because they want to do everything they can to damage the president before the 2020 election. I think they are actually emboldening him and making him stronger, but we shall see. I think it's an embarrassing moment for the Democratic Party, but they are beyond embarrassment, and the mainstream media is as well.
Right, and my curiosity is, what did they get out of this? It seemed like there must have been some goal when they initially put the brakes on sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate, but now it looks like this was in pursuit of nothing. Mitch McConnell wasn't even taking it seriously. It wasn't any meaningful leverage to the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi got nothing out of this, Joe.
Well, I think what they did was they undercut their own message as they saw it of the graveness of the situation. It was so important. They had to act quickly. They couldn't wait for litigation over subpoenas for key figures that they wanted testimony from. The Republic was in jeopardy. The president was going to destroy the country. We had to remove him from office, and then crickets. I think they have completely undercut their message.
Yeah.
They look foolish because they are foolish, and I think she had no game plan. It's pretty obvious. She wanted to quiet her nutty base. She did that with the impeachment, and then she said, "Now what do I do with this pile of junk?"
Yeah.
Joe, yesterday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was on actually Saturday with Judge Jeanine Pirro, and he says this. He says, an interesting thing happened yesterday, meaning Friday, in the U.S. District Court of Appeals in D.C. Pelosi's House Attorney, Douglas Leder, made the argument before a judge that they could offer another article of impeachment. Now, I don't understand how that happens if they've already voted. Can you just continue to add things on?
Well, the answer is there's no law on this. This is all basic constitutional stuff. The House has the sole power of impeachment, so presumably if they want to impeach again, they can do so. I think what's interesting is that they are using legal arguments that impeachment is very important, that they need to get information. So their whole basis for arguing is that they are entitled to grand jury information from Mueller and to the testimony of senior White House officials protected by confidentiality and executive privilege, is that they need that in order to get additional impeachment articles. They can do that with or without a court decision. Their purpose is to get information to continue their argument in public, to denigrate the president and to harm him politically.
Right.
I think the public has lost interest in their court battles. The only people who care about this are the Democrats and the mainstream media, people like Jake Tapper and the idiotic and really quite depressing Chuck Todd. Every time I see Meet the Press, I think of Tim Russert, my old dear friend. We both knew each other when I worked for Senator Mathias and he worked for Pat Moynihan, and we used to joke about the Senate. And you watch what Tim Russert did on that show as a wonderful, fair-minded journalist, and then you watch this political slug, Chuck Todd, who truly is an embarrassment to what used to be called journalism.
Going back to this question, though, of what they're arguing in the court, the reason they're arguing this, Joe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is so long as they can say impeachment is a legislative function, then therefore they can get any document they want because that's what they're pursuing by way of their legislative responsibilities, right? That's the argument?
They're arguing two things. They're arguing that, and then they're arguing that it's also quasi-judicial, and that it is so important in that latter category that they can break executive privilege just like they did in U.S. v. Nixon when they got during a pending criminal trial, they got access to the Nixon tapes. Now, this is entirely different, and in fact, their arguments are quite weak. My guess is if it goes to the Supreme Court, I think there's a very good chance the president's going to win on documents and people's testimony. But that's what they're arguing. They're saying that because it's an impeachment and because it's quasi-judicial and because of U.S. v. Nixon, they're entitled to all the information and the testimony they want.
Well, as usual, they're setting a very dangerous precedent. It'll gum up the works for any future president as well, regardless of party affiliation. What about this idea that the Senate can just basically say enough? If Nancy Pelosi doesn't stop dragging her feet and send over the articles of impeachment, Lindsey Graham is saying it's time, regardless, to take matters into our own hands. If she refuses to send the articles as required by the Constitution, I would work with Senator McConnell to change the rules of the Senate so we could start the trial without her if necessary. Is this possible?
Absolutely. They have to decide whether or not they have 51 votes to do that. So that means they have to count Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and maybe Romney and see whether or not they have enough votes. They probably would get Joe Manchin, so he would nullify one of the recalcitrant Republicans. But all of that is possible. Of course, Josh Hawley is going to introduce a resolution which constitutes a motion to dismiss today. So we have all of that, and McConnell has said, I'm not doing anything until I get the articles. So with that mindset by McConnell, he says no articles, no trial, presumably he would be amenable to changing the Senate rules, although he has traditionally been loath to do that, to make a motion to dismiss appropriate without any articles being present. The whole issue is, what can you do when you have no articles? And that is why it would probably be in order to change the Senate rules to allow them to either A, have a trial without articles, or B, simply dismiss the whole monstrous joke.
You know, Joe, you had said that Nancy Pelosi did this in order to, coddle her base, the far left part of her party. But did she accomplish that even if she doesn't send the articles over to the Senate?
Well, probably not. And I think that's where the conflict comes with her. I don't think she ever really wanted to do this. She was forced to do so by Ocasio-Cortez, the nutcake in New York. And so she was forced to do this. She said all along she didn't want to do it, then all of a sudden she decides she has to do it. Now, she didn't do that because all of a sudden she saw the real constitutional danger. She saw the political danger, which was her base. The nuts on the left. And believe me, you look around this country and you watch the media and look at the people in her caucus, these people are crazy. They are mindless. They are anarchists. They're crazy. And that's what she's dealing with. And this is what she has wrought. This is what the Democratic Party has permitted to develop. And they're stuck with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Joe diGenova, thank you so much. Well, actually, are we keeping Joe?
I'm here.
Okay. All right. More coming up with Joe diGenova.
We're talking to former U.S. Attorney Joe diGenova. As always, good to talk to Joe. Joe, we were talking about Nancy Pelosi. I'd like to bring her into the conversation about Iran now, because this weekend she indicated the House is set to vote on a war powers resolution designed to, as the Washington Post says, limit President Trump's military actions against Iran. Pelosi said this weekend that lawmakers are concerned that the Trump administration acted without consulting Congress and without respect for the constitutional authority Congress has to declare war. Now, in your mind, Joe, are there any constitutional questions with the president's decision to strike Soleimani?
No, because he acted actually consistent with the War Powers Act resolution, whose constitutionality has never been challenged, and I'm sure that it is unconstitutional, but nonetheless, presidents have recognized it, and within a reasonable period of time after taking action, he did notify Congress. Mm-hmm. So that is in compliance with the law. You don't have to notify immediately if operational security is paramount, which in a case like this, you would never brief Congress ahead of time, and Nancy Pelosi is well aware of that. This is a political gesture they're doing with this resolution, but that's fine. They can do whatever they want, and if they think that the president is bound not to respond if more Americans are killed, they are wrong. The president will be able to respond if Americans are killed, even if the House of Representatives passes this resolution, that resolution might very well pass the Senate, become a joint resolution, which the president could veto, by the way. He doesn't have to sign anything that they pass. So this is all political, what Pelosi's doing. And the notion that you could have a designated terrorist group, which is what the Quds Force was, and have its leader killed in a military action because he was planning further strikes against U.S. facilities and diplomatic and military personnel. The fact that the Democrats object to that taking out of General Soleimani, again, underscores how far they have gone to the left. They care more about Iran than they do about our military and diplomatic personnel. And remember, the Democrats are the ones who were just fine with the murder of 4 Americans in Benghazi. And when the whistleblower came forward, Greg Hicks, who Victoria, my wife, represented, the Democrats were fine trashing that whistleblower because he was the wrong kind of whistleblower. He was honest.
Right. Joe, on Sunday's broadcast of CNN State of the Union, Elizabeth Warren was on with Jake Tapper. This seems to be the spin now that the Democrats are going to give to the attack because they don't want to be in the position of defending terrorists. So here's the spin. This is cut 26, Jeff, of Jake Tapper and Elizabeth Warren discussing the attack on Soleimani.
Are you suggesting that President Trump pulled the trigger and had Qasem Soleimani killed as a distraction from impeachment?
Look, I think people are reasonably asking about the timing.
Is that a valid argument for them?
Well, it's certainly not a valid argument. They are claiming that this is Wag the Dog, the movie. This is the president allegedly taking a military action to distract away from impeachment. Nothing could be further from the truth, but it doesn't matter. The Democrats are going to say and do whatever they want. The allegation is, of course, disgusting, but the Democrats have become used to saying and doing disgusting things because they've been encouraged by people like Jake Tapper, who's a former Democratic staffer, who, like Chuck Todd, who used to work for Tom Harkin, are now, the scions of networks.
Right.
It's quite hilarious, actually, when you think about it.
And also, if the president was looking for a distracting military strike, wouldn't he have done it before he was impeached?
I would have thought, yes, I would have thought so. I would have thought that you would have made yourself invincible by striking early.
Yeah, it seems like the timing's off if he's planning this thing out that way. Joe diGenova, also, we see some New York Times coverage this weekend of the Soleimani killing, and they allege that the idea to strike Soleimani was included by the Pentagon as an option that was so extreme it was meant to make the other choices look reasonable. And this is a way to convince the president to take less extreme options, but he instead went for the crazy one that the Pentagon didn't expect him to choose. Is this how the Pentagon operates?
No, it isn't. And in fact, the Pentagon never presents to the president options which they believe are wrong. As a means of boxing him in. That's nonsense. That article in the New York Times was consistent with a series of articles that they have written about everything from Benghazi to the Russia hoax to Spygate, where they seek to find a way to diminish the actions of President Trump, at the same time seeking to buoy the spirits of the resistance inside the civil service, the Pentagon, and the CIA. It was a silly article, and in fact, their articles have become so silly and so consistent that even though they don't have a comic page in the New York Times, we now know it's the front page.
Yeah, we found it. All right, thank you. Joe diGenova, always good to talk to you, Joe.